right, we're going to do a quick change here in the HS Visio studio and bring on our next guest in just a moment. We're going to continue talking a bit about organizational leadership and psychological safety with our next guest. She is Professor of Leadership and Management at Harvard Business School, Amy Edmondson. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I should say, Amy's joining us just before her talk on the main stage, which is coming up really shortly. So thanks very much for stopping by on the way here. So Amy, you identified the concept of psychological safety back in 1999. Could you just summarize what it is, what it means for people that haven't heard of it? Well, I think we're going to be hearing more about it later.
We will hear more about it in just a few minutes.
Yeah.
So, but I will say the simplest way to say it is it's a sense of permission for candor. And this has so many interesting connections with the work that Aaron was doing, right? But when you believe that you are expected to tell the truth as best you can, and there'll be nuances across cultures, of course, but it's a sense that that's what's appropriate around here, and it's pretty rare.
So how has work from home, hybrid working, the pandemic affected this? Has it made it harder or easier for people to feel a bit more comfortable?
On average, harder, but a great deal of variance.
Why has it become harder? We heard so much about people are going to understand more about your personal circumstances at the beginning.
You know, because we're not as able to read the air. I can't help building on that wonderful prior talk. So there's less nuance in our ability to sort of read the room, to understand those moments when, in fact, your voice is welcome, right? Which we can read more naturally in a face-to-face setting. And I think because initially when we all went home and started working virtually, we tried to just work the same way, but on Zoom or on Teams. And that doesn't work very well. You actually have to use the technology to have a different set of structures and tools to have the same high-quality conversations. You have to adjust the way you use the tools.
Does the type of organization play a role as well? I'm wondering, is it tougher in more hierarchical organizations, or is it just as tricky in flatter businesses?
I think what makes it is certainly hierarchy is a contributing factor to people's unwillingness to speak up. But the problem is, in organizations that think of themselves as flat, it can be even more challenging to speak up because they're worrying about what other people think of them, and they don't believe it's okay to worry about that. Whereas in a hierarchy, everybody knows it's okay to worry about that, right? If the boss is in the room, you're holding back, you're reading the tea leaves. And in a flatter organization, there's this belief, I'm supposed to just be myself, but everybody knows actually that's not so easy to do.
So if we're talking about leading from example, and there are a lot of leaders here in the audience, how can you, as a manager, as a team leader, embody these values of personal safety yourself and therefore encourage people in the team and the company to do the same?
You know, one of the leaders I studied, Eileen Fisher, says, be a don't knower, right? Which is so counter-normative to our model of leadership. Like people, many leaders are absolutely allergic to the idea that they could say, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know about that. Tell me more. But what she says is, when you are a leader, Ed Catmull says the same thing, it's absolutely essential for you to go first, right? To make it safe to not know. We live in a knowledge explosion, right? There is just no way you know everything.
No way.
Nobody does. And so the sooner and the more cheerfully you can acknowledge the things you don't know and convey how interested you are to learn from others, the sooner other people will be doing the same thing.
Yeah. Thank you for the questions coming in on Slido, by the way. Keep them coming, slido.com, and then it's nbforum 2022. Kaliomeki podcast, they've been sending a few questions in. Amy, what is the most valuable thing we lose if we fear? So if we're too afraid, I guess, to have that feeling of safety.
Well, there's the personal and the material. And the personal that we lose is, it's when fear dominates, when fear rules, we are in a position where we are unable to truly express ourselves, to truly contribute. So we sort of lose that opportunity to have a sense of joy in the work we're doing, a sense of being a part of something larger than ourselves, a sense of really contributing to something that matters. And then materially, when people are afraid to speak up, there's two categories of really bad things that can happen. And one relate to human safety and dignity. You know, when someone could have prevented serious harm but didn't. And the other relate to business decisions and lost opportunities for innovation that didn't go the right way because people held back and didn't feel safe to speak up.
Yeah. Jovin picks up on this, and I'll just highlight their question so everyone else can see it. You mentioned reading the room and feeling the air, but obviously a lot of people are still working remotely, some still 100%. And Jovin says, how can CEOs build psychological safety in bullet point meetings online? So I guess they mean, you know, if it's just a sort of a classic, here's our agenda for the day, and giving an atmosphere where people can say, yeah, but I want to add this, or I want to do something different.
You know, I'm not quite sure what's meant by bullet points online, but I will say that the way you create psychological safety, first and foremost, call attention to uncertainty. Call attention to challenge, to novelty. You know, keep emphasizing the fact that we've never done this before. Like, we're all absolutely dependent on our ability to work together, right? So you're sort of, if you're setting a foundation for why your brain and your thoughts are necessary, it lowers the threshold. The second and most obvious thing is ask questions. You know, ask people, what are you thinking? What are you seeing? What are you hearing from customers? What are your ideas about that? What are we missing? Like, when you ask questions, people feel not only drawn to speak, they feel awkward about holding back. It reverses the calculus immediately.
Even in a space, though, where everyone feels comfortable to speak up, how do you deal with tensions around that? There's still going to be colleagues that don't do their job, that keep messing up. So how do you manage that alongside making sure everyone feels okay?
Well, so, I mean, this is a key misunderstanding, I think, about psychological safety. It's probably best to think of psychological safety as permission for candor, right? So if
all types of candor.
Right, if someone is persistently unable to do his job, he needs and deserves feedback. If that feedback doesn't have the impact that we need it to have for this person to be a contributor to the team, eventually we free up his future. Right? So psychological safety is not the same as job security.
No.
Right? It's not an anything goes, relaxed, comfortable environment. Right? The term is inadvertently misleading. Right? But what it means is we recognize that what's at stake here matters too much to just let fear and interpersonal fear keep us from contributing our thoughts.
So following up on that, Tina has written in and said, how can we connect radical candor and a growth mindset to psychological safety? Which I think, really kind of ties those threads together.
These are wonderful siblings. I think, so growth mindset is a set of beliefs that individuals hold that allow them to stretch, because they believe they will be getting smarter and better from, when things go wrong, that's okay. That's to be expected for novel tasks. But it's an individual mindset. Psychological safety describes a climate where, by the way, that mindset can flourish. So they're like siblings. The individual brings the mindset, the team brings the climate, and nothing's stopping us. Radical candor. And radical candor is a manifestation of psychological safety. And Kim Scott and I have had many, many conversations about this. And radical candor does not mean brutal candor. It doesn't mean candor with no consideration at all about what you might think or how am I communicating actually. It's probably better to describe radical candor as compassionate candor, where I'm going to try my very best to be clear, but I'm going to be very curious about the impact I'm having. I'm going to want to know how am I doing? Am I getting through? Can you help me? Can you help me sharpen my message so that we're really communicating?
I think your messaging's doing very well today. Are there any especially strong examples of companies or leaders that you've worked with in recent years who have turned personal safety around from a not good start point?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great examples, and this is old now, but I have worked with them a little bit on a case study, was Ford Motor Company under Alan Mulally about a decade or so ago. Why it's such a good example is that it's one of the more extreme cases of non-truth telling getting shifted to truth telling, right? Making it safe for people to tell the truth to power. That was just for a very long time literally not done. People not only believed, but it was true, that if you reported bad news up the hierarchy, that would be your last day on the job, right? People got fired for bad news, which is very difficult if you want to be a learning organization, right? There's no way to get better if you're firing people for telling the truth. So it was kind of an extraordinary example of turning it around, and it was done by modeling the right behavior, by creating the conditions where people realized that he was serious, and then by rewarding candor.
Okay, really great example. So your big speech is coming up very shortly. Without giving too much away, what can people expect? Why should they be sticking around, stopping their networking and going back into the main room to see you?
Well, I think ever since Google did a study about 6 years ago on what makes a team effective. Google is famous for having very strict hiring, very, very difficult to get a job there. And yet they found, and they were frustrated by the fact that they had persistent performance differences across teams. And so they said, okay, we're going to study it. They're very good with data, right? So they said, we're going to study it. And they did an extremely thoughtful, systematic job. I was not involved. But what they found was the number one factor explaining performance differences across teams was psychological safety.
The number one
factor. There were other things like clarity and a sense of purpose and meaning, but number one differentiator was psychological safety. So they got very interested in that. And then, they published this widely, and a lot of other people got interested. So the reason you should come to the talk is I'll talk about why might that be the case? Like, what's going on that something that sounds as squishy as psychological safety might be the number one factor explaining performance differences across teams, even among very high achievers, right? And maybe even especially among high achievers. So we'll talk about what it is, what it isn't, which we've already done a little bit here.
Yeah.
And look a little bit at some of the research showing positive effects, not the Google study, but other studies. And then the real job is to say, okay, what are some of the very specific, very concrete things that each and every one of you can do more of to create more fearlessness?
Great. We love a speech with some practical guidance, and I know a lot of people are here for their own personal development. And just finally, how does it feel for you to be traveling again, being in a big event like this?
It is such joy. I really missed having an audience. I missed the laughter. I missed the human connection. There is just something about being in a room together that is energizing and a true privilege and pleasure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been saying that. So it's been great to have you here, Amy Edmondson. We look forward to seeing your speech on the main stage very shortly.
Great.
So thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
We're going to move on, and I'm going to tell you about our final guest for this section, who probably needs, she deserves a round of applause, does she not? And an even bigger one when she's back on the main stage.